name for this panel might not have been more accurately kids who weren't picked for softball. Anyway, I'm talking about media idolatry. What it is, how to recognize it, and how to repent of it now. I will begin with a spoiler alert and trigger warning. I'm doing theology. This is not religious studies that I'm doing. Theology assumes that God is real and goes from there. I realize that that is not where everyone here is coming from, and so I thank you for your patience and generosity. I will attempt to base my comments on sound media ecology and social science. And I'll be done in 15 minutes unless the Lord comes again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. But that's statistically unlikely. Neil Postman writes, "Truth does not and never has come unadorned. It must appear in its proper clothing, or it is not acknowledged," which is to say that truth is a kind of cultural prejudice. This comes up also in Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's, I don't have the pronunciation, The Little Prince. He tells the tale of a Turkish mathematician who, dressed in the ceremonial garb of his people, presents a brilliant theory before a conference of scholars. His work is ridiculed. Sometime later, the same mathematician gives the same presentation to the same group of scholars, but now he is wearing a suit, and he is hailed as a genius. The Little Prince is a children's story written for adults. The idea of truth requiring literally its proper clothing, and the foolishness of this is one that even children can recognize, or perhaps I should say that even adults can recognize. But the same theme, truth must appear in its proper clothing, or it is not acknowledged, is a major but unacknowledged one in church historiography, the writing of church history. The insistence on the form that one's favored media favors to the exclusion of other accounts in other forms is the single biggest impediment to unity. At last count, there are over 40,000 denominations of Christian practice and belief. Some of them play well together, a lot of them do not. We decided to start without you.
Oh, well, the more audience will be on their way soon, I think.
Oh, okay.
The plenary session ran long, and Ed is adjusting the...
Okay.
Yeah, Ed is adjusting the proceedings. So I'm sorry, I'm late, and probably we'll have a host of other people who will be arriving soon too. So, my apologies. Please continue as you've gone. How far along are you?
Oh, just started. Let's start.
Just started. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, good. So, thank you for taking charge of the situation in my absence. Welcome to everyone here. I expect you'll have a handful more people arriving in a second, and we'll probably have more time as a result of Ed's adjustment. You've done individual introductions already? Okay, well then I will read them. I will introduce our guests here today. Just give me a moment. Great. We'll have a proper round of applause for our friends who are making their presentations this morning. I'm Mike Bloom, Manhattan College, the Internet Officer at NEA, and I'm very happy to be with everyone this morning as we celebrate the final day of our communion, and huzzah! It's been wonderful, and I think the important thing is that we save the best for last, which means that these presentations will resonate with us for the days and weeks to come. This panel is called Questions of Media and the Environment, which is right in the wheelhouse of what we do as an organization, as a discipline. Our panelists today are Michael Giobbe, right? I've never said your last name out loud. Giobbe.
In American English, it's Joby.
Okay.
In
how do you
Italian, it's Giobbe, which requires, it's Italian for Joe.
Well, how do you like it?
Giobbe.
Oh, Giobbe. So our friend Michael Giobbe.
Just one hand.
Oh, good. I got two hands. I can use two hands. So Michael Giobbe. independent scholar presenting today, Media Idolatry Stuck Between the Now and Not Yet. And we have Jennifer Rausch, right? Yes, I thought it was Rausch, but I didn't want to take for granted. It could be Rauch, right? Yes.
You can say it that way.
Can I say it that way? Do I need two hands to say it that way? Okay, I'll do it. Jennifer Rauch, right? Long Island University, Brooklyn, presenting mindful media use towards sustainable engagement with digital technologies. Jermaine Martinez is here with us today from Kennesaw. Is it Kennesaw or is it Kennesaw? It's Kennesaw, isn't it?
Neither.
Oh, good.
Because it's a typo.
Good. So
I'm
we have,
from not Kennesaw State.
So
I'm from Kutztown University.
Oh, in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
Very good. Very good. So home of Yangling or nearby Yangling. Right?
Plenty of it.
Yeah, I have friends from the Kutztown tradition. Good.
Yeah.
Welcome. And Jermaine will be presenting Pushing Against Media Wash Decadence, a pedagogical tool and justification for assigning difficult reading to students, which was something that stood out to me as I looked through who was presenting today, because that is a popular refrain among teachers who appear at these sorts of conferences. And last but not least is our friend Bartolome, right? Is it correct? Is that right?
Bartolome.
Okay, I'll do my best. I need Yakshimash, that's the only Polish. Dobrze, bardzo dobrze, those are the only words I know in Polish, so I'll work out your pronunciation as we get to know each other better. And your last name is pronounced Nosala?
Knosala.
Knosala, beautiful, beautiful. So he'll be producing from Silesian University of Technology. Yeah?
And I changed topic.
Okay.
Media ecology in Poland, the topic.
Media ecology in Poland, which sounds absolutely wonderful and fascinating. So thank you for for attending to my long-winded introductions of our wonderful guests, and we will go in order. So we'll start with Michael, who's presenting Media Idolatry Stuck Between the Now and Not Yet. And we have what? We'll do 15 minutes per presentation.
Okay.
Please, Michael.
I thank the people who just arrived. This is much more promising. And the earlier group was not the smallest that I'd ever addressed at a media ecology function, but it was quite close. So I begin with a spoiler alert and trigger warning. I'm doing theology. This is not religious studies. Theology assumes that God is real and works from there. I realize this is not where everyone here is coming from. And so I thank you for your patience and generosity. I'll be done in 15 minutes. It'll all be over. So long as in that time, that is unless the Lord comes again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. But that's statistically unlikely. Neil Postman writes that truth does not and never has come unadorned. It must appear in its proper clothing, or it is not acknowledged, which is to say that the truth is a kind of cultural prejudice. This comes up also in The Little Prince. Don't ask me to pronounce the author's name. I've tried earlier and it just... but he tells the tale of a Turkish mathematician who, dressed in the ceremonial garb of his people, presents a brilliant theory before a conference of scholars. His work is ridiculed. Sometime later, the same mathematician gives the same presentation to the same group of scholars, but now he is wearing a suit. He is hailed as a genius. The Little Prince is a children's story written for adults, the idea of truth requiring literally its proper clothing. And the foolishness of this is one that even children can recognize, or perhaps I should say one that even adults can recognize. But this same theme, truth must appear in its proper clothing or it is not acknowledged, is a major but unacknowledged one in church historiography, that is the writing of church history. The insistence on the form that once favored media favors to the exclusion of other accounts in other forms is the single biggest impediment to unity. And whenever I insist on excluding whatever truth doesn't fit my media forms, I am guilty of a particularly postmanesque sin, that of media idolatry. bowing before one's medium as before a graven image. In other words, preferring one's medium to the truth. And we all do it. Now, this paper is a work in progress. It is part of a book in progress. The comments I'm about to make are based on another paper I presented at the MEA 2009 at St. Louis University. If you are interested, or if your mind wanders and needs something else to focus on, Media Ecology, Publications, Proceedings, 2009, mine is the third one from the bottom. How wide, how high, how long, and how deep, the role of media ecology in church history. Hope to be producing this as a book. A working title is What the Platypus Knows. If you need the more user-friendly approach, I recommend the first 4 chapters, that is 60 pages, of Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's really not about television. It's a very readable introduction to media ecology, and it's a good read. Now, the elevator version of that paper that I just talked about goes something like this. If you plot on a timeline the history of peoples of faith in the West, or what has since become the West, from Moses to the present, and on the same timeline plot the history of communication from Moses to the present, the pattern pops that each successive contour, the major contours in the history of peoples of faith, is preceded by a significant development or change in the history of communication. Moreover, the character of the new medium of communication becomes, the physical characteristics of it become the social, intellectual, and spiritual characteristics of the new society formed by and around the new medium. Marshall McLuhan makes the observation, I call it Rule 41. I call it Rule 41 because it appears on page 41 of the Gutenberg Galaxy. When the sense ratios change, then what things which were formerly clearly understood become opaque, and things formerly opaque become clear and visible. Now, within the Christian tradition, we have 2,000 years of conflicted history. We have chosen up sides. And we ask everybody coming in the door to make an odd choice. In that, the Roman Catholic tradition is neither more nor less than the ground of Christianity in the West. Those who are mature in this tradition are themselves grounded. The Reformation tradition is informed by the Scriptures, and those who are mature in this tradition are themselves scripturally formed and informed. The Pentecostal and Charismatic tradition major upon the effects of the ministry of the Holy Spirit. And for this reason, they major on the effects of the ministry of the Holy Spirit in real time. Therefore, things done in real time, such as ministry or prayer for healing, they're remarkably effective. So we ask people coming through the door, so would you rather be grounded, informed, or effective? Pick one. Or in fact, we are now far more open-minded and ecumenical. Pick two. Well, what do I do with the third one? Oh, do what people of faith have done for centuries. Throw it under the bus. And I believe that the Lord would say, you will not throw under the bus what is holy. Now, sometime after I finished at Regent College in Vancouver, British Columbia, Neil Postman gave the annual Lang Lectures at Regent College, and he had made the observation that each successive medium of communication is a cultural shift for this reason. Every new medium conflicts with the culture of the previous medium. That's very nearly the best read of, sadly, the history of Christianity is a history of conflicts. Even to the point where the word Christian in our own lifetimes has gone through its own cultural shift, where it used to mean not just describing one who follows the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels, but one who is mature in them. Christian has now come to mean immature and ignorant, and given to argument. There are reasons for this. And theology is itself, we're talking about the conflict of paradigms, but Thomas Kuhn doesn't apply here, because unlike other paradigms of faith do not succeed each other, they accumulate. So church history over time becomes the history of a succession of divorces. And like many divorces, particularly the acrimonious ones, they become a sort of, there comes into play a sort of traumatic fixation. Well, I saw my parents do this, that there's the divorce, justified or unjustified, but the parties to the divorce, particularly if it's a messy one, they don't move past it. Or they move past it in other areas of their lives, but they still look at the person whom they divorced, which by definition they once married and shared a life with for a while. But in their mind, that person is always the person as they were at the end of the cycle. And so that is an example of traumatic fixation. There is a curious example of this. Evangelicals, okay, Catholics, I'm putting all cards on the table. I grew up in the charismatic renewal of the Catholic Church and had a master's from an evangelical school. I have been told to my face that I don't exist. That I'm a mythical beast, that I'm making it up. Catholics call themselves, they call the Pope the successor of Peter, and so Catholics are, by extension, the tribe of Peter. Evangelicals, whether they wish to acknowledge it or not, are the sons of St. Paul, because in any evangelical church, much of the text, the preponderance of the text, heard and learned is that of the text of the letters of St. Paul. More so than the Gospels, by the way. And so there are these two competing texts. One, Paul writes in one of his letters, I opposed Peter to his face. Well, now that was a one-time thing. Evangelicals do tend to take that as sort of life verse with regard to the Church of Rome. Sad, tragic. But the sons of Peter, the sons and daughters of Peter, have not yet gotten past that and internalized where Jesus said to Peter, before the whole thing happens, Peter, Satan has sought to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that you may be strengthened. And so when you have recovered, go and strengthen the others. What go and strengthen the others looks like is you lead with the riches, not with the rules. If in all of our tribes we are willing to do that, we can have a great party. Because then we won't be asking people whether they want to be grounded or informed or effective. Pick one. All of a sudden, all of these resources simply become ours. And we can have the party anywhere. This is not simply a whole lot more fun. This is the on-ramp to the greatest adventure that I know, because this means being able to be grounded and informed while having real-time creative communication with God in real time. I did mention real time, did I not? And that becomes the ground and the practice of something that I call spiritual creativity. It applies to every human activity. It is transformative. It is tikkun olam, the healing of the world.
So we'll continue on with Jennifer's presentation. Let me read the name of it one more time before you start. Mindful media use towards sustainable engagement with digital technology.
Yeah, thank you. So I like to think of this as kind of a conversation. I realize the clock is ticking on me now.
It's okay, you're fine.
But I hope that we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards. We'll still have time. Because I'm interested in hearing what you guys think about all this. The work that I have in progress is basically looking at sustainability in media use and what that might mean. That obviously there's a human or social sense to this, and there's a lot of public anxiety about the idea that whatever our current patterns of media use are right now as individuals or as a society, that they're like kind of not working as well as we would like them to. You think about people like Sherry Turkle and Douglas Rushkoff and Jerome Lanier, and a lot of other people have been writing on this topic the past several years. The other angle of that I'm exploring is environmental sustainability. That publicly we're becoming a lot more aware of the environmental impact of our intense mediatization. All of the natural resources that go into making devices, the energy that supports data centers, as well as the problems that are created by e-waste disposal of toxic things that are sent overseas. The theory that I've been using to explore this is slow media, which is sort of an outgrowth of slow philosophy or slow food, if you're familiar with that movement. I've been talking to some people this weekend about it, and they're not really familiar with slow food, but they kind of understand what the fruits of it have been in our society. That nowadays a lot of us take for granted that we have availability to green markets and community-supported agriculture, farm-to-table restaurants. But a lot of this was propagated starting about 20 years ago by an Italian group called Slow Food. who put a lot of charisma and financial resources into building these global networks that we all kind of benefit from today. What I find interesting about slow media and slow theory is that it's not actually about going slow. A lot of people don't understand it or like put off by it, like, oh, who wants to go slow? That sounds boring. But really, I mean, do you? Like, oh, let's all slow down and we'll just walk slow and talk slow. It doesn't sound that appealing, but if you really think about it, it's about sustainability. It's about finding a pace or tempo that works for you, not being slow all the time, but preserving, times and spaces for slowness and reflection and contemplation to kind of balance out the, hurry of the rest of our lives, as well as the environmental angle. But what I was going to focus on today was basically mindfulness and how people have been using the mindfulness movement that's been happening, exploding kind of in our society lately as a way of addressing the problems that we associate with technology. A question I have to ask here of you guys, and it might be different from this group than other people that I've asked, but if you had to choose between physical harm to yourself and damage to your smartphone, your digital device, which would you choose? If you could choose between hurting your body and hurting your phone, which would you rather?
Depends.
Really, does it?
Yeah, it depends.
Maybe you're thinking like, oh, what kind of physical damage versus how much?
Yes.
Injury
Cost
to my
benefit,
phone.
right.
Okay. Well, in a recent survey, about half of Americans said that they would rather suffer physical injury than have anything happen to their phone, which I thought was amazing. And this fits into another conversation that we've been having in our culture about technology addiction or internet addiction. Have any of you ever said that, like, oh, I'm addicted to Facebook or social media, I'm so addicted to the internet? Or you felt like, you go online and, hours later, you're like, oh my God, I'm still here, what have I been doing?
Yes.
A lot of people have been joking about it, like, oh, I'm so addicted, like it was cute or funny or kind of cool even. And a lot of people have shunted aside the idea that we can be addicted to technology, that it's somehow, it's not like being a drug addict, it's, this totally different phenomenon. But lately, a lot of tech designers have been coming forward with these mea culpas, including people who have designed for Google and for Facebook, like the guy who co-designs the like button has come forth and launched this movement for kind of sustainable technology use. And they feel guilty that they participated in getting people so engaged in their phones. I don't think any tech companies will say, we're trying to get you addicted to your smartphone, but they're like, oh, it's all about engagement. New research is starting to suggest, though, that the mechanisms through which we get behaviorally addicted to our devices is kind of similar to substance abuse, that it has these chemical effects on our brains. You probably all know about Nicholas Carr and people who have talked about the dopamine squirts that you get. It also affects your cortisol levels and all kinds of other very real biological effects that device use has on us. So these conversations about technology and problematic aspects of its use and the conversation about mindfulness have kind of dovetailed recently into this mindful tech movement. That a lot of corporations are taking very seriously. Places like Google have a program called Search Inside Yourself, where they actually have workshops for their employees to practice mindful emailing. And a lot of tech people are sort of, training their employees, or in some cases, IT schools are training their students to be more mindful and sort of present when they're using technology as a way of not only getting familiar with themselves, the effects that media use has on, your brain, your breathing, your emotions, as well as building empathy with the people that you're communicating with through technology, which is a big problem nowadays with young people who, the research shows that their empathy skills have plummeted in the past 10 years. So, the problem is technology use, the solution to some extent is mindfulness as a way of moderating your media use and understanding its effects better. To define mindfulness, I can say it's awareness cultivated by paying attention in a sustained and particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And that's the definition that's given by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is a big leader in the mindfulness movement and mindfulness-based stress reduction particularly. And to give it a media ecology spin, I kind of think of it as McLuhan likes to tell the story about the descent into the maelstrom, and you have the sailor who's being buffeted around, and he sort of detaches himself from the situation and observes it neutrally to see what's really happening, to sort of come up with a way for himself to deal with it better rather than just being carried away with it. The way that mindfulness is kind of being appropriated in the West, and this in other ways is very much secular. It's about addressing, individual social problems more so than transcendence, right? It's not, even people like Jon Kabat-Zinn or Mirabai Bush, a lot of the people who are very central in this movement are people who, went to India in the early 70s in the sort of countercultural Buddhism days. And they've realized that, one of the beauties of Buddhism is that it's very malleable, but they've sort of adapted it to Western society in ways that it has maybe lost some of its spiritual meaning, which maybe a bonus or maybe problematic. And of course, mindfulness has roots in Christian traditions and all kinds of other contemplation in Hinduism and Taoism and Judaism, of course. Some of the interesting things that have been happening are a lot of empirical research on mindful media use, showing that it's a skill that you can learn, and that it has strong biological effects. It affects your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest mode, as opposed to the fight or flight mode. That basically, you're in this state of sort of heightened awareness and anxiety when you're on the internet, that you're holding your breath when you're on email, waiting to see what happens next. Whereas if you're mindful and you breathe, it puts you into this other mode. That mindfulness also promotes neuroplasticity. We used to have the idea that your brain was kind of fixed, but now we know that the activities that you engage in change the physical, wiring of your brain in good ways and in bad ways, and mindfulness has, some good biological changes that way. It also lowers anxiety, it betters your immune function, and it improves the way your amygdala works, which is the part of your brain that recovers from stress. So that you get stressed out and you can either stay in that or you can sort of be more resilient and let it go. 5 minutes already, this is going fast. Some of the other research has focused on the idea of your brain has these other modes. Your body has the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Your brain has the default mode. You're sort of in autopilot. You're operating mindlessly. In Buddhism, they call this monkey mind or puppy mind, where your brain is just sort of racing and you're not putting it on a leash. Versus executive function, which I'm sure most of you guys have heard of. There was that famous study with the marshmallows and the kids, and the kids who resisted the marshmallows when they were young wound up succeeding in life because they had better executive function. They were able to pay attention, control impulses and control their behavior, make smart decisions, be self-aware. So that in a lot of ways, by using media mindfully, by strengthening your executive function when you're using media, you're actually exercising free will. This is about agency as much as it is about sustainability. That you're being in the moment and you're making decisions instead of just sort of being swept along with that current. It also ties into conversations about multitasking too. By now most people are familiar with the research on multitasking that shows that it's not effective, that we think we're getting so much done when we're multitasking, but that multitasking is a misnomer. You can only do one thing at a time and sort of switch between them, and that you lose time between each task. But that because of these hormonal reactions, you feel really wrapped up, oh yeah, I'm getting stuff done. So a lot of people know that multitasking is suspect, but we still do it anyway, you know. Once we build these habits, it's hard to stop. So the tie to slow media with all of this is that, you know, being mindful really means slowing down your mind. When you're mindful, you actually slow down your perception of time. You expand your subjective experience. You increase the density of information that you're perceiving as well as your ability to remember it. The brain actually does have a speed limit, which is why multitasking doesn't work. It's about 120 bits a second. And right now, for you guys to listen to me, it takes about 60 bits a second. So half of your brain is needed just to sort of process what I'm saying. Yet alone, if you're talking to somebody next to you or looking at your phone, you know, your capacity is very easily exceeded. Unlike computers, we don't have multiple processors, right? We just have one. So yeah, we have this strong cultural bias towards speed. You know, people like Doug Rushkoff and others might say that the main beneficiaries of speed are advertisers, because we as human beings in our lives don't necessarily get more benefit from like clicking through the internet faster. The people who want us on our phones all the time, multitasking on our phones, clicking as quickly as possible, are the advertisers who want our eyeballs and the intermediaries who are selling the advertising who get paid, you know, for every click. Or actually they've been shifting towards time spent on site too, because they realize in the attention economy that we have today that we've kind of hit a wall. You can only get people to click so much so fast. So the quality of engagement is starting to matter a little bit more than the quantity. In my analysis of all of these different mindfulness movements, mindful tech, e-mindfulness, mindful emailing, conscious computing, contemplative computing, they're all kind of talking about the same thing. And the lessons that I draw from this are the importance of one, conscious breathing. You might have heard of email apnea or screen apnea, the idea that we're not breathing a lot of the times when we're on the phone, or on any kind of device. That through breathing we can cultivate attention and we can also reduce stress. 2, monotasking. That we have to retrain ourselves to try and do one thing at a time and do it well. 3 is stopping. Taking occasional breaks makes your brain work better. If you're just like cruising through all of your mediated work and never breaking, then you're actually probably less effective and maybe making poorer decisions than if you paused. And just, even God stopped on the 7th day, right? So we all deserve to as well. 4th is unplugging. That in addition to taking occasional breaks throughout the day, and this, that comes from all different areas of research. Yeah, I'll wrap up. Breaking throughout the day, but then also finding time to just get away from media and pursue your own agenda, not being responsible to other people's needs, or especially to commercial corporate media's agenda for you. And then also meditating, which can reinforce and deepen a lot of these other topics. I just want to say that there are some questions that are raised by, for me at least, the mindfulness industry. The fact that there's this crazy like adult coloring fad going on about stress reduction for adults by coloring. They're trying to sell all kinds of devices now that like help you with mindfulness. Fitbit and all these people have them, that they remind you to breathe throughout the day, or they let you know when your pulse is racing that you should take a break and try to relax. But ultimately, you don't need to buy into the industry. You don't need a $150 like calmness tracker. Breathing is free, and you can do it anywhere, and it's like always with you. It's not about the gear. And I also have some reservations about the fact that big companies like Google and Microsoft and Monsanto are creating these super stressful work environments for people, and then saying like, oh, well, here's some mindfulness training, here's a meditation room or yoga classes that we provide on site for you to deal with the stress. So it's kind of addressing the symptoms instead of the problem. Like, we're creating all this stress for you, but we'll help you deal with that instead of just not making you stressed out anyway. And also, of course, that they have practical incentives for doing this. They don't really care about your spiritual enlightenment. They're not trying to make you a better, more ethical person. They want to improve your productivity. They want to improve their retention of talent and other things like that. So this whole conversation offers a lot of clues for us as individuals for ways that we can, manage our mediated lives better. But at the same time, there's this kind of collective issue that we've been ignoring that, I hope someday people start addressing a little bit more seriously. Thanks.
So we're gonna get, Jermaine, you need to get set up a little bit?
Yeah, just got it.
Okay, good, no problem.
Hang on.
Yeah, no problem. So we're gonna, in a moment, have Jermaine's presentation on pushing against media wash decadence, a pedagogical tool and justification for assigning difficult reading to students. So we'll just pause for a moment.
Oh, here we go.
What's that? We're gonna have a mindful moment.
Okay.
There is a slow reading movement,
Can you see that okay? Is that viewable?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Maybe I just can't see it because I'm up close against the Canola's glare. Okay, so yeah, thank you. My time on, am I going? Ah, solid. All right, so yeah, pushing against media wash decadence, pedagogical tool. Let's jump into it. Perennial storied problem, our students reading non-compliance every year, and especially for those of us interested in media ecology, some of those texts can be a little daunting for undergraduate students in their primary works, if you want to expose them to primary works. And so that's really what inspired me to come up with how have I solved this? A colleague came up to me in the hallway and said, hey, I hear that your students read. Yeah, they do. How are you doing that? And then this paper is what came out of it. Given the conference theme of technology, spirituality, and ecology, I turned to Eugen Rosenstock-Huessy, who is prescient of the challenge of learning how to live wisely in our modern media environment. He writes of decadence. He says, decadence is the disease of liberalism today. It is a disease of the last man of Nietzsche, who twinkles, what is love? What is a star? What is happiness? And then blasts the future, because he could only enter the future by inspiring the next generation, but this precisely he declines to do. Decadence means being unable to reach the future in body or mind or soul. Rosenstock-Huessy here identifies both the problem and cause of what today we might notice as robust forms of individualistic apathy that undercut any moments of self-reflection and consideration of what it means to live well, what it means to live ethically with others, what it means to be fully human. Media and digital technologies exacerbate decadence by allowing opportunities for distracting oneself from quiet self-examination, critical reflection, offering a contrived emotion of devices in their stead, and really facile and superficial encounters with others. He argues that societal decadence occurs when older generations do not prove to have the stamina of converting the next generation to their own aims and ends. He writes, a decadence of parents leaves children without a heritage, and the only energy that can fight this evil is faith. Grown-ups, in other words, have not made it both possible and necessary for the youth to claim their time-binding inheritance. The youth can lose faith in a future and grow apathetic when elders have not equipped them to engage with the great sages of the past in conversations that can become fertile grounds for cultivating personal and collective futures worth serving. Apathy is a sign of decadence at work. So it's not just parents who contribute to decadence. Today's quick information environment, the rapidification that seems to be coming up in themes during the conference, educators can be complicit in decadence too when they do not have the stamina for pushing against the student-mediated wash dispositions. And one way teachers can push against this is to assign difficult readings. That will require students to confront and push against those media-washed dispositions. So this paper works against decadence and towards renewed faith by providing teachers a resource for cultivating both stamina, possibility, and faith, necessity. So again, this is Kunze. This is where I got this notion of decadence, and I'm focusing on possibility and necessity. How can I do this? So in many ways, it's very practical advice. I'm sharing with you a pedagogical tool that I use. So to kind of ground this, just a really quick and fast formal analysis of how media ecology might be introduced to students in two fundamentally different ways. A textbook, a famous textbook, Griffin's Introduction to Communication Theory. He introduces media ecology, and this is how it goes. Boom! There it is, all at once. Bam! There it is, hot right there. And for those of you who are curious to know where media ecology fits on this scale, boom, right at a glance, there it is. If you read the text, it's always got these nice little bubbles on the side. So in case you were reading, if you're a student and you're reading through the paragraph, and you miss the fact that they actually italicize symbolic environment, they also have it on the side there. So that you don't actually have to read the text, you can just get away with a quick glance of it there. And there they are again, you know, media. Here's media italicized that lets the student know, hey, it's important. But hey, you don't actually have to read that either, because I can just turn the page and see these things on the side. This, the white spaces of the text as well really help to accentuate the fact that there are these little nuggets on the side. It really directs the attention in kind of a figure ground way towards this. These over here on the side, quick, and it feeds the disposition, that media wasp disposition for rapid information processing. Now contrast that with the actual primary texts in media ecology, and admittedly I chose one that is not a fair fight for a textbook. You know, the medium is the massage. It begins like this. There's your introduction to media ecology, students. Bam! A picture of a hand cupping an ear and the massage. Well, what the hell's going on? What? You know? Notice how you have to stop and slow down. What is this? What's going on? What's happening? And then the next page. And how? You're like, whoa! And then you have this great little epigraph here at the bottom by Alfred North Whitehead, The Major Advances in Civilization, Processes that all but wreck the societies in which they occur. And now it's up to the student to slow their roll a bit, to try to work out how the massage, this insight, and how, and the book, oh my God, there's so much going on here, I've got to really process this. And that's not all, there's more. You open up the next page, and you. So the textbook can be read by anyone at any place, but this one is saying, I'm addressing you, the reader, and you have the thumbprint there, the icon of individuality. And if that's not enough, have you ever contemplated suicide? What? Wow, okay. This is addressing me as a reader in my sort of uniqueness and particularity as a valuing, living being who has to struggle with issues such as death and harmony within. I mean, whew! And then you've got the spiral here, the maelstrom. So there are two very different kinds of readers and reading, just in this really quick formal analysis of the two texts. And again, I just put it in bullet point there. Scott McCloud would not enjoy that. So yeah, you have hot content-driven messages that just jump out of the page, very hot. There's very little faith in the reader's own capacities for processing information. That's why they have the redundancy system there, and they're very clear. So that's high structure. Very low context messages for Edward Hall. People who are familiar with Edward Hall is the same high context, low context. Very low context messages. Low stamina. It requires very little stamina. You can see these things at a glance. And then you have McLuhan and Fiore. Form-driven, cool messages. A lot of faith that the reader is going to actually sit there and spend some time and get into it. So there's a lot less structure. High context messages, meaning you have to participate in eking out the meaning of the message a lot more than you would in a low context message. And then requires high stamina, meaning participation and effort. Reader atrophy. Corey Anton has a great piece on reading good books, and in which he really puts it all out there in terms of the conditions that give rise to reader atrophy. And it's really reader-driven. It's what drives non-compliance. Really quick and fast and loose review of Corey's ideas here of what contributes to this sort of reading atrophy or apathy and stamina for dealing with difficult text is the rapidification of information out there. Things are moving so fast, we want that soundbite quality. Students are geared towards soundbite quality, the quick Twitter post, the quick status update, the Snapchat, boom, boom, boom. And Corey is very insightful when he notices that in our culture today, there's more social utility in being able to claim for oneself that you're incompetent as opposed to lazy. So someone would say, so a student comes to class, maybe does just enough of the reading to claim in class, well, I didn't understand the reading. Because there's more social utility in being able to claim incompetence rather than, I just didn't put the effort in to actually get it. And then imagination, that there is a lack of imagining grand purposes for knowing, grand purposes for study. Corey is really high on cultivating and inspiring practices of study, rigorous study. And to do that, it's so important that you have a grand purpose that can pull you along in the struggles of study. And so given all of that, I needed to create a tool to inspire this, and I call it an auditory Sherpa. These are difficult terrains. Right? So here's an example of an auditory Sherpa. I use enhanced PDF files on primary text. This is Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk. And the Sherpa pedagogical tool, actually, no, that's getting a little ahead of myself. I'll show you how it works. Here's Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk. Each one of these little icons there are audio comments that I embed into the PDF files that students have available to them. And so here's the second is that we are all somewhat in love with our ways of talking about the world. And I realized that a student may have missed this insight, for instance. If I notice that there is, in primary text, you're going to have, complex syntactical structures, you're going to have different modes of address than what they're used to, than what their normal media dispositions are used to. And so the Sherpa is there to guide them through those odd, rocky terrains. So if I notice an area that
right here
may have a problem or may be complicated,
when he says, the second
they click on it,
that we are all somewhat in love with our ways of talking.
And I go about explaining and offering further sort of examples. Sometimes there are references.
Slow down, go back.
Oh, would you like to hear the whole thing?
I want to hear it.
Oh, okay, that's great. It's pretty long though, and I only have 5 minutes.
Actually, key to emphasize. When he says, the second is that we are all somewhat in love with our ways of talking about the world, whatever deformities such talk might have. And it takes some doing to convince any of us that our favorite sentences often betray our best interests.
I read it out.
Even though he's saying, he's drawing our attention to our talk, in particular the sentences that we use, please do not understand that very literally. When he says our favorite sentences, he is also saying in a metaphorical way, our favorite ways of thinking, our favorite ways of explaining, our favorite ways of understanding the world. As we go around throughout our days, we explain the world to ourselves and to others in ways that typically tend to make sense to those other people. We've talked about this at the start of class, start of the semester. Mondays are a bummer is an explanation. And it's how you explain what this day is to be interpreted as. So when you say Mondays are a bummer,
sense there, I start to unpack it and relate it back to the course. I also use reading guides and pop quizzes, sometimes pop, but these are all problems of possibility that really get the fire to get them to do it. It also removes the excuses. A student can't come in and say, I didn't get the reading, because they have a reading guide. If they don't know what they're talking about, I may ask them, well, what did you write for question number 3? In groups, they work together before class even begins and they share their reading guides with one another. I leave them in groups as we have course discussion. That way, even those who just kind of understood the reading could still get some discussion with those who did more of the reading, put more effort into it. I just wanted to remove the excuse of, I didn't understand the reading. And that was one way that I could do this. And also, again, like I said, it guides people through. So the pedagogical tool reading guides quizzes are only a support for possibility. Necessity, however, requires the movement of inner motivation. Thus, the final plea to teachers who are hesitant assigning difficult primary text, consider the wise observations of Jacques Barzun, who writes, anybody who has ever taught knows the act of teaching depends upon the teacher's instantaneous and intuitive vision of the pupil's mind as it gropes and fumbles to grasp a new idea. Put into practice, this means viewing reading as environments. To view the readings as the creation of an environment that encourage such fumbling struggles so that the labor of teaching might be induced, namely guiding students in the art of wresting ideas from difficult primary texts. Learning how to wrest an idea from conversations that have long preceded first-year students is one way of assigning difficult texts. Is one way that assigning difficult texts can prepare students for lifelong learning. What does it mean to discover a new idea? From this, I draw from Kenneth Burke, who observes his observations on earning new ideas are very instructive. A new idea is a new invention. As such, like an invention is full of its inventor. It is earned by him. Since it is the comes after, for his own goes before. Others must earn it anew. We must earn an inheritance by taking it, others' ideas, as the basis of a new problem. If we squander our inheritance rather than making it the basis of a new job, the process of alienation is underway. So to earn ideas anew, older alien ideas, requires that students encounter these ideas through a renewed struggle. A struggle-filled medium such as difficult text can engender a basis for those new problems. Students earn an inheritance through the struggle-filled practices of study that encourage not just a learning about or a learning of, but more primordially a learning through. The practices of slow study, of reading, talking with each other, rereading, becomes itself a forcing ground for the creation of meaning. If the user is the content, then as students struggle to make meaning with and through the work of original thinkers thinking about media and environments, for instance, McLuhan's work, students thus confront the goes before of seminal ideas in media ecology, while their struggle-filled study becomes the basis for discovering their own uniquely new comes after. Okay, finishing up here, last sentence. In general semantics, knowing how to learn is the crucial intellectual engine for how human civilizations sustain and progress, namely through participation in time-binding processes of communication about and with others about cultural knowledge. Given a culture of easily accessible and comprehensible information, maybe some teachers feel guilty about signing difficult readings because they cannot imagine their purpose as Sherpas for students' time-binding inheritance. Eugene Hussey's thoughts on how older generations condemn younger generations to barbarism when they lack stamina of converting the next generation to their own aims and ends are instructive. Maybe some teachers do not sense the necessity of assigning difficult text because textbooks may offer a more palatable option for media-washed student appetites, and they just can't be bothered with the uprising and revolt that could happen when you give students these texts. Maybe, or if Postman and Weingartner observe critical content of any learning experience as the method or process through which the learning occurs, then perhaps the guilt some teachers feel stem from intuitively sensing that textbook instructions do not engender practices that engender practices falling short of cultivating students' amazing capacities for claiming higher education's nobler ideals. Yeah, so that's pretty, I think I'll just leave it there.
So just before we begin our final presentation on the media ecology of Poland, I have an announcement to make about our schedule change. I received word that the poetry reading will be, how do I say this? The poetry reading will be simultaneous with lunch. It was a late night last night. We're gonna have a poetry reading with lunch. So we'll head up to Moraga when we're done. 11:30 is the start of that last part of the program. So we have enough time to have a full presentation and some question and answer.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Bartłomiej Knostala. I'm from Poland, and I want to talk. I was impressed by your talking. It was really great. I want to talk about our projects in my city in Gliwice in media ecology. We did it last year, and it was 2 projects. The first one was around the Technopoly, and the second one was on the digital paths. And these are the slides for it. We did it. With and this is around on the digital paths, and we did it with Silesian University of Technology, which is mine university, and with museum in Gliwice, and it was very important because it was an attempt to move from the academia into general public. We also engaged Polskie Radio Katowice and all these lectures which were delivered. After that, we had an audition in very late school in Polskie Radio Katowice. And if you know Polish, you can listen to this audition because this is on the podcast. And also my lecture devoted to Buckminster Fuller as a mystic was recorded on the video, and it is possible to watch this on the website of the Museum of the Gliwice. And it was few lectures. Every month was one lecture in the museum. The first one was Introduction to the Technopoly by Neil Postman. The visions of Marshall McLuhan and about Buckminster Fuller were my lectures. The 2 was by Grażyna Osika, who recently wrote a book about personal identity in the age of the digital communication, and about smart cities and smart citizens, the last one. So the inspiration to quit with, this academia thinking about humanities and put it to the people on the street. There were passages from the Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan commentatory, but there are no passengers on the spaceship Earth. We are all crew, so we want just to make, active citizens which will be active in the technological progress. The second project was aimed to the high school students, the inspiration was the Danish technological panels. It's not in the media ecology tradition. It's rather in technology assessment, participant models, and science technology society. But these traditions are have a lot of commons, and this idea goes that we can decide as a society to which technologies we are, choosing. Like in Denmark, they have Danish technological panels, and they invite citizens to vote upon certain technologies. Like there was human genome projects in '89, air pollution, and my idea was to make the same thing with the high school students, just to prepare them to be able to deciding about very technological society. Because who is deciding about this technology? Great corporations. But they are using our resources. So this is the movement back to the society, put the technology back to the society, or democratization of technology and science. So the challenge was how to speak about technology with high schools, and I prepared workshop entitled "How to Evaluate Technology? Can Technology be Evaluated?" And just the first few slides, the first few minutes was about the quiz, and I was talking about dystopian movies. And it was quiz without the titles, and I was asking students to guess. So I was talking about WALL-E, about Terminator, about Matrix, and about Transcendence. And after that, we were trying to think what these movies have in common. After that, I had a few minutes of a short lecture about risk society. It is the notion of Ulrich Beck, and I was describing, the case in Great Britain with the mad cows and the crisis of the expertises, and to engage students, I was showing pictures, and we were trying to interpret these pictures. Now, all these are Banksy murals, and they are talking about relation between economy and society. And so it was great fun, and it takes a lot of time. And the next step, I don't know if you know Michael Sandel and his way of delivering lecture. He has this special oral attitude to discussing every case. So I was trying to do the same, and we was discussing about artificial intelligence, GMO, and transhumans. So I was asking students who is pro and who is against, and after that I was asking to provide argumentation. So we have a discussion. One of the inspiration was the book wrote by Pierre Hadot, what the philosophy in the ancient time as a spiritual activity. Pierre Hadot was the student of Michel Foucault, and he discovered that in ancient times, philosophy wasn't just theories of the reality. And if you were studying philosophy on the academia, we are learning about theories of the reality of Aristotle, Plato, and others. And he discovered that it was not the aim of ancient philosophers. The practical attitude, it was the ultimate aim. So to change yourselves. And he also put this hypothesis that this kind of thinking about philosophy as a wisdom was destroyed by university in the Middle Ages. So we just start to think, to regain this wisdom approach, we have to go outside the academia. And we are trying to do. Thank you very much.
We could probably take 15 minutes or be slightly more indulgent than that with questions if we have a really interesting and provocative kind of conversation going on, as long as we're around 11:30 up at Moraga. So, Reed.
Well, first, thank you. Boy, what a great panel. It was really rich, and I want all of your papers. I would argue you're all doing theology. There's only one of you naming names. But the question, Jermaine, I have for you is, in the embedding audio files into PDF files, does this assume the students reading the PDF on screen? Because that, to me, is the biggest threat to the actual accomplishment of the reading.
Yeah.
And how do you fight that?
Yeah, I know. I kind of reached the point of the sort of slow technology movement and the sort of contemplative technology, because I just felt like, how am I going to push against this? And you might want to consider it as not a zero-sum game, but utilizing technologies in slightly different ways. When you through the process of remediation, you have this difficult text. It really requires literate sensibilities that are really morphed and moving in new ways. But, so the text, even though it's a PDF form, I take it as a first step. That once those literate capacities are being massaged, as I'm introducing sort of a slowdown of the reading, instead of reading for immediate comprehension. But yeah, I mean, yes. In the big point, yes.
I want to, all of you have the same clue-in-esque thing that it's really about art, that the slowing down is the process of perception. And we have to get our students to slow down enough to perceive their perceptions.
Got it.
But have you had, I love the idea of putting the embedded audio files in there as a, you don't have an excuse for not doing the reading because I didn't understand it, right? Killing that social utility. But do you have the effect, or have you noticed, because this is my fear if I did it, that, oh, I just have to listen to the audio files the way I go to the M. Griffin text and just read the call-outs, right?
Yeah,
and if I hear what the professor says, that's all I need to get.
I agree. Yeah, it would be very difficult. Well, okay, so something I wasn't able to get at in there is the way that the reading guides feed are related to those specific areas that I pointed out. The audio isn't there to be a substitute. It can't function as a substitute. It is there to clarify. So if you think about the idea of us entering into the conversation of mankind, we enter into the parlor. Burke has a great vision of that. You know, people come to the world and you enter into a conversation that's already going, and you fumble through, listen for a while, then contribute, and then boop, you pop out of the parlor again. Really, what I'm trying to do is provide sort of an oral, and I was inspired by Walter Ong in this, in that so much of thought is based still on conversation and orality. That I wanted to have some sort of oral component where I'm demonstrating to students they're getting an experience of a conversation that goes on. In other words, I'm the Sherpa. I'm showing them how you read these difficult texts and how I'm engaging in a conversation. So maybe there's a word or an outdated reference or a syntactical structure or a mode of address or a reference to a person that they clearly don't know. And that's where I would come in. And then I would articulate why that might be significant and ask questions even in the audio. And that helps to push a little bit. But yes, in the big scheme of things, absolutely, I'm with you on your concern.
I'm just going to say, as a variation or extension of that, some of us actually assign books that aren't attached to a screen necessarily. And I'm reminded as a child of the reading a book and then hearing a beep and you turn the page. Okay, so that we can have a little audio mechanism as that we could see. I don't even know how that would work. I mean,
I'm not going to lie, I was also inspired by that.
yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful. I'm not a Luddite per se, but I definitely have resisted a lot of the technology in the classroom. And so my students read history and rhetoric, the questions, the study questions, read it in advance, study questions, and then discuss it small groups. That makes great sense to me. Like they resist it like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we really want to feel like it's like they're entering into an environment. I want them to feel reading as a space for contemplation and self-reflection. It's less about the content and more about the medium. I'm trying to massage those media-washed dispositions, kind of pushing against it and encouraging them to slow down and feel and sense the reading as an environment.
So this comment is about comment and questions about the mindfulness issue, which is, I think, super fascinating. So it reminded me a little bit of this segment that I saw on TV Nation in the 90s. It was Michael Moore's TV show, where a lot of people were being moved into cubicles in their work, and the companies were having people feng shui their cubicles to make them more, so that you could work longer in a smaller space. And so it's an interesting parallel for what you were talking about at the end, I think, from the 90s and that sort of thing. But
giving people some superficial control over their time and space, yeah.
So he did this. He did this thing where he went and feng shuied people's toll booths for toll booth operators. So the thing that I thought I wanted to ask you about is sort of two things. One is how do we deal with the gig economy and all of this, where people sort of have to work, you know, the sort of Uberization, get your side hustle on sort of thing, where people have to work so many different things that are all networked on their devices, that they don't necessarily have time to slow down. The financial pressure of life in a city pushes on them that way. And the other thing is how do we go from, or how do we deal with the problem that you mentioned at the end about this being just a superficial individual thing? How do we go from mindfulness to movement or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, to some extent it's relative. I mean, some people, you know, who are hustling on the gig economy would say, God, I wish I had a corporate job where they offered free yoga classes and mindfulness training. I only had to answer to one boss, you know, every day. I mean, yeah, I basically, I'm working on a book on this, and I end the book by posing a lot of these questions and posing solutions, and a lot of them are really pie in the sky, that like there are structural issues at work here, especially when you talk about like, you know, the issue of automation and the problem of there aren't going to be enough jobs in the future. You know, a lot of people have been trying to move lately towards a shorter working week, and they've made all kinds of arguments that you can be just as effective in 30 hours a week as you can in 40 hours a week, while also maintaining work-life balance and being more involved in civic life and things like that. You know, I guess, you know, we have to have some dreams to unite us for a vision of a better future. But yeah. Also, when I was writing this book last year, it seems to me like positive change was a lot more probable than the situation that we're in right now, where we feel like a lot of ground is being lost. You know, we're struggling just to like stay afloat, as opposed to imagining that we might be able to move our society forward in a more enlightened direction.
Yeah, I thought all of the presentations were great, and I heard slow down. And I heard real time, and I heard take time, at least those particular things. So all sort of on that theme. And I would ask this sort of question that my colleague just did, and that was, when you look at the big picture of things, it seems like when it comes to media, that we have the media, we're not going to go back, this is where we are, and we don't want to go back. So society is pushing very strongly, and I see valiant efforts like yours as valiant efforts. But in a way, they're very small compared to this huge dynamic that is moving forward. What do you envision, let's say 10 years out, in where you're at? Are you still going to be doing valiant efforts? Is there any way to pick up steam for that? And this is what the gentleman was asked, going from mindfulness to sort of a movement.
Who would like to field that? Anyone in particular? Sure. It's in 10 years in Poland. What do you hope to see happen?
I have no idea.
Have no idea. What would you like to see happen?
So when I think about automatization, and you know, we think also, and we are discussing general income, to change the economic systems. And there is a great book written by Tim Jackson about this changing the economics notion into the prosperity, sustainability, and the others. I think this is the only option. So the future without jobs. And from the other side, I think about some prospects for the future and this democratization of technology. This is, according to me, a prospect for the future. We want to decide about technological inventions. We want to design the internet. It was what Andrew Finberg, Canadian philosopher, said. We want to design. And the great corporation is designing now everything. So this is the economic and social change which we make.
Yeah, for me, it comes down to more of a Postman or a McLuhan or kind of approach where It's the training and perception. I mentioned earlier about art. But there's the ability to train perception so that we can be more mindful, more aware. You mentioned the maelstrom, the media maelstrom, and that's how I imagine the capacities that you win through the struggle, through study, for instance. Those evaluative competencies, the ability to process information, to feel and sense oneself as a part of a larger conversation, to have those experiences generate and create, as Corey would say, the inbuilt appetites and expectations that you carry with you as you go about engaging the world, so that you are engaging the world with a sense of wonder and awe, and critical sort of awareness of what's going on around you. And I think that was very clear in the McLuhan's use of Poe and the maelstrom, being able to navigate those media waters. At least that just as a small start, that's where
I wonder if War and Peace, for example, would be published today. I mean, I think our publishing industry is at fault as well, because they try to reduce down everything to just little pamphlets. Yeah.
Although somehow people get thrilled at Harry Potter books at 700, 800 pages.
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
How does she do it? I don't know.
Please.
First of all, thanks for the very, very inspiring panel. It's more than a question that I propose you, but I'm asking myself since very long time, at least since when I was a student at university. Now I teach. I try I ask to my students to read difficult things. Not everyone jump on the topic and choose to. I propose them the choice of books, and not that often they choose the most tricky or interesting one. But I let them choose in order to see also what had happened, and then comment at the end after the exam. But my question is related to the fact that I'm Italian, and I know very well the slow food movement, and I used to think that the secret ingredient in food preparation is time. So much before the guy decided to create this marketing-oriented stuff that in Italy is not so well perceived by everyone, but is still an interesting point. I think that I'm a Tai Chi practitioner. I spend a lot of time preparing my food and showing my daughter that the food preparation is part of taking care of you and the others. I read tricky books that I'm still trying to understand McLuhan since 25 years, but there's something missing. And it brings me back to the maelstrom idea. We are somehow in the need to take something very little in order to not go down. So what can be a very little approach to endorse the question of environment? For me, is stop talking about the environment. That's my proposal. Instead of being on a spaceship, I prefer to consider myself a little clock wheel that makes something works in the environment. So I think that our perception of the environment and us, it's the problem. So the little idea, the little piece of wood that is turning on the maelstrom and we should grab, is that we are just a particle of a little thing that is part of a bigger thing. And this bigger thing is not the planet we live on. This bigger thing is the planet we are. And I don't want to sound too new age or too, no. That's it. It's just that I'm still searching something to teach to my daughter and students, to propose to my daughter and students as a little idea. And since I'm an hypertext theorist since quarter of a century now, I think that the little idea that everything is connected is still not being grasped by many of the media commentators, media students, and media scholars. We are talking about the latest technology, but we don't get that the web and everything that works on the web is just an hypertext application. Facebook is a forum with instant feeds, but it's just a forum that works because on HTML environment. So if we get that the environment of the web is one, and that everything is connected, maybe kids shouldn't be able to publish so stupid things like they're doing in their teens and then get sick about it when they search for a job. So being connected, everything on the web should drive us to learn that we are part of the world and not looking at an environment that we must preserve. I'm the environment. My God is outside there and is the giant tree that you see when you jump out the room. The first big tree you see, it's my symbol for spirituality. I don't need nothing more. And I try to, as a Catholic, raised Italian, to understand my choices. There's no choice. I mean, I choose nature because I'm part of it. And I think this is a small thing that the biggest part of the humanity still not grasped because the media doesn't want to. You consume much less if you feel part of the environment.
Yes, yes.
What do you think about?
May I address that a few thoughts? In a more perfect world, we would all have time to attend all of each other's presentations. Yesterday, I gave a talk entitled Laudato Si to Shining Sea, talking about the role of the classical trivium in the work of Pope Francis. And you, sir, being Italian, have a particular set of resources which the rest of us do not, in that Italy is perhaps the sole exception in the Western world where they actually retained the practice of the trivium and ignored Peter Ramus. Very wise move, sir. That grammatica is the study of the relationship between things. That if your worldview is grammatical, you understand and appreciate relationships and slow food. It is no mystery to me that the slow food movement grew out of Italy rather than perhaps Germany or Chicago. And so in this, how do I'm not quite, oh, yes. Marshall McLuhan in The Global Village had said that the first question which the grammarians asked was not whether it was possible to do something, but whether the thing was itself good to do. And we need a lot more of that. And what we will have when we have practiced a lot more of that is a culture which looks more like you, Jennifer, described.
Or we could mention here too, if you went to Bologna last year, you might have heard Antonio Lopez, who wrote Reading Media Education. And he does some really amazing work. But he's really talking about the metaphors that we use in this field of ecology and environment and the way that they kind of exclude living systems.
Yes.
You know, and that in an era of climate change, we really need to be incorporating the environmental effects of media and relating, talking about media as environment, you know, in the environment and how it affects our planet as well as our society. So there's a whole interesting conversation that you should be having there too.
And on that note, if we would like to continue this conversation, we'll have to do it over lunch, perhaps after the poetry. I thank our four panelists again. Please enjoy lunch and the poetry and some conversation.